You put in 60 hours a week. You arrive early, leave late, say yes when everyone else says no. You follow the rules. You give up your time, your energy, your health, all for the job, for the team, for the promise that someday it'll pay off. You're loyal, honest, proud of doing things properly, and yet, somehow, you're stuck. Watching someone else, someone who cuts corners, talks more than they actually work, knows the right people but doesn't have your skill, climb higher and faster, living the life you thought you'd earned. And you're left asking yourself, what did I do wrong? But maybe that's not the right question. Maybe the real question is, what lie was I told? From childhood, you were taught that hard work leads to reward, that effort equals outcome, that if you grind long enough, the system eventually notices, recognizes, and pays you back. But what if that equation is broken? Worse, what if it was never true to begin with? Nietzsche, the German philosopher who tore down illusions and exposed the hidden machinery behind human belief, once argued that moral labor, the kind of work praised for its sacrifice, obedience, and humility, isn't noble at all. It's a form of spiritual slavery, a psychological trap built not to lift you up, but to keep you exactly where you are. Here's the uncomfortable part. In a world run by power, morality often becomes a tool for controlling the powerless. You were told virtue is its own reward, that staying good and keeping your head down would eventually make life fair. But life isn't fair. It's competitive, it's political, and the system you serve doesn't reward virtue, it rewards value. Not the value you produce, but the value you control. That's why a nurse working a 12-hour shift earns less than someone selling a get-rich-quick course on TikTok. That's why a blue-collar worker who wears their body down every day retires with barely enough, while someone gaming financial markets walks away with millions. None of this is your fault for believing the myth. In fact, the myth was built specifically for people like you, to keep you obedient, to keep you working, to stop you from asking dangerous questions, like who benefits from your loyalty, who profits off your exhaustion, and why the system praises hard work while rewarding something else entirely. Nietzsche wasn't telling you to stop working. He wasn't glorifying laziness or selfishness. What he challenged was the assumption that obedient labor is automatically moral, that suffering without reward is somehow sacred, that virtue equals submission. He named this mindset slave morality, a belief system rooted not in strength but in weakness, not in power, but in fear. If you feel stuck despite doing everything right, you're not losing your mind. You're waking up. You're starting to see that the world isn't broken. It's working exactly as it was designed to. The people who rise aren't necessarily the most skilled or the most selfless. They're the ones who understand power, how to move through it, how to claim it, and how to stop tying their worth to whether the system approves of them. So ask yourself, what if working harder isn't the answer? What if the belief in moral labor isn't your ticket out, but your cage? Because until you face that lie head-on, you'll keep grinding while someone else quietly rewrites the rules. Let's look closer at the contradiction sitting right in front of us. If hard work leads to success, why do the hardest working people so often struggle just to get by? Think about the construction workers up before sunrise, laboring until their backs give out, the nurses pulling 12-hour shifts, sprinting between patients, skipping meals, missing holidays, the delivery drivers, janitors, bus operators, truckers, the people who keep entire cities running. These are the same people living paycheck to paycheck, worried about rent, unable to afford getting sick. Meanwhile, someone filming get-rich-quick content in a rented Lamborghini on TikTok pulls in more in a single day than that nurse makes in a month. You've felt this. You've seen it. This isn't some rare glitch. This is the system. Labor builds the world, but labor doesn't control it. The people earning the most, CEOs, hedge fund managers, politicians, thought leaders, aren't sweating in the heat or grinding through the cold. They aren't pushing their bodies to the limit. They're operating in an entirely different domain, one built on leverage, perception, and control. They don't just work, they position themselves, they influence, they own. Let's be blunt. We've built a world where value isn't tied to effort. It's tied to power. A world where controlling capital, networks, and narratives pays far more than making anything tangible. And that's not an accident. It's tempting to call it a mistake, but it isn't a malfunction. This is exactly how the game has worked for centuries. Physical labor, however honest, can be replaced, automated, outsourced, devalued. But control over resources, people, ideas, that scales. A nurse can only treat one patient at a time. An investor can move billions with a single click, and the system rewards scale. This is where the lie of moral labor turns especially cruel. We've been trained to see suffering as noble, endurance as honorable, silent sacrifice as the moral backbone of society. And in some sense, it is, but morality doesn't pay rent. Praise doesn't build wealth. Sacrifice doesn't automatically convert into influence. While working people are told to keep their heads down and stay grateful, the people at the top are trained in strategy, law, manipulation, and capital. They're taught to manage, not serve, to dominate, not endure. They learn the rules, then learn how to rewrite them. So ask yourself, if moral labor is so righteous, so essential, why doesn't it come with power? Why are the most indispensable workers also the most disposable? Why does society preach hard work, then funnel the actual rewards elsewhere? Nietzsche would say it's because the moral system was built by the powerful, not to free the masses but to pacify them. It teaches obedience, not sovereignty, self-sacrifice, not self-assertion. It glorifies submission and punishes anyone who questions the hierarchy. That's why the lie sticks around, because it benefits whoever's in charge, because it keeps people striving, hoping, working for a reward that never actually arrives, because the promise of someday is one of the most effective chains ever forged. So the question becomes obvious. If hard work doesn't lead to power, what does? And more importantly, are you willing to unlearn the story you were raised on? To understand how this lie took root and why the world keeps rewarding manipulation over merit, perception over perseverance, we need to dig into the foundation of the values we were handed. That brings us to Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche didn't treat morality as some universal good. He saw it as a weapon, built and wielded by the powerful, to serve their own interests. In his view, what we call morality isn't truth, it's strategy. He drew a clear line between two competing systems, master morality and slave morality. Master morality comes from strength. It celebrates ambition, boldness, creativity, and the will to shape the world. It doesn't wait for permission or ask to be recognized. It declares its own value. Someone operating from master morality defines good as whatever expands their power, their freedom, their ability to build and lead. Strength isn't treated as dangerous, it's treated as a virtue, and virtue, in this frame, is anything that affirms life, power, and possibility. Slave morality is the opposite. It's born from weakness, from people who can't compete on the terms of raw power. So they rewrite the terms entirely. They insist humility beats strength, that obedience is nobler than dominance, that suffering signals moral purity. Under this system, traits once seen as weakness get rebranded as virtues, because that's the only way the powerless can find dignity in a world they don't control. And here's the trap. Once this moral code spreads far enough, it stops looking like a strategy and starts looking like absolute truth. That's how moral labor became something to praise. The idea that good people sacrifice, that honorable people serve, that virtue means doing your duty and expecting nothing back. We romanticize the worker who never complains, who always says yes, who puts everyone else first, without ever asking who actually benefits from their silence. Nietzsche would put it plainly, you're not rewarded for your morality, you're pacified by it. You get praised for being dependable, promoted for being manageable, rewarded just enough to stay hopeful, but never enough to stop needing the paycheck. Meanwhile, the real currency, ownership, control, power, stays permanently out of reach. So why does this belief keep its grip on so many people? Why do millions still hold on to the idea that suffering equals virtue, that sacrifice gets noticed, that obedience eventually pays off? Because the story is beautiful, because it gives pain a purpose, because it lets people endure unfairness without ever confronting it directly. Slave morality survives not because it's true, but because it's comforting, and comfort is a powerful sedative. Nietzsche wasn't interested in comforting anyone. He wanted to wake people up, to force a confrontation with the unsettling freedom that comes once you stop waiting for justice and start setting your own terms. And that reframes the real question, not just why we were taught to suffer quietly, but who actually benefits when we do. But if the whole system is this rigged, so clearly built to reward control over contribution, why do so many good people still buy into it? Why do millions of hardworking people keep chasing a promise that almost never delivers? The answer isn't purely economic, it's psychological, and it starts long before your first paycheck. From childhood, we're taught the world is fair, that good things happen to good people, that justice eventually wins out. Stories, cartoons, school lessons, they all repeat the same reassuring message. Do the right thing, and you'll be rewarded. Be honest, be kind, work hard, and eventually life will make sense. But there's a problem. Psychologists have a name for this belief. The just world fallacy. The idea that the world is inherently fair, that effort always converts to outcome, that what you give comes back around. It's a comforting idea. It gives people hope. It helps make sense of suffering, but it isn't true. And clinging to it, inside a system built to reward power over principle, isn't just naive, it's genuinely dangerous. While you're staying late, double-checking spreadsheets, cleaning up messes you didn't create, someone else is learning how to actually play the board. While you're saying yes, staying polite, taking the extra shift, someone else is building alliances, studying leverage, figuring out how to bend the system in their favor. You think you're being moral, they're being strategic. And in this world, strategy wins. That's why the engineer keeping the servers running gets laid off while the well-connected reputation consultant gets promoted. That's why the nurse loses her weekend bonus while the hospital's PR budget doubles. You were taught to trust the former. They were taught how to skip steps. Here's where it turns genuinely cruel. The system doesn't just fail to reward hard work, it actively uses your belief in fairness to keep you locked in place. The longer you wait for your virtue to be noticed, the easier you are to control. People who believe in justice don't rebel. They don't demand more. They keep waiting for recognition, for fairness, for someday. But someday never shows up. This isn't only about money, it's about mindset, about realizing that if you keep navigating with the wrong map, you'll never reach the right destination. The rules you were handed were designed to produce good workers, not powerful people, because the people who taught you those rules understood the game perfectly. They just needed someone else to keep playing it. So if the world isn't fair, if virtue doesn't guarantee victory, what actually does? How do you move forward without turning ruthless? How do you protect your progress without losing yourself? The answer isn't abandoning morality, it's stepping down from worshiping it. It's letting go of the idea that sacrifice is a strategy, and accepting that good intentions alone aren't a plan. In a world built around power, understanding power is part of what it means to be good. Once you accept that fairness isn't a guarantee, but a story sold to keep you quiet, you can finally start writing your own story, not one of blind sacrifice, but of conscious strength, not obedience, but ownership, not waiting for the world to change, but learning how to change your position within it. So what do you do once you've seen through the lie? Once you realize waiting to be rewarded for obedience is a dead end? You don't throw your morals away. You redefine what strength actually looks like. This is the mistake a lot of people make right after they wake up to all this. They assume the only alternative to being exploited is becoming heartless. But Nietzsche wasn't preaching cruelty. He wasn't asking you to abandon integrity. He was asking you to stop confusing submission with virtue. His answer wasn't to tear down morality, it was to move past the morality of weakness, to become someone who doesn't just follow the rules but writes new ones, someone who doesn't need permission to live with purpose. Nietzsche's name for that person is the Übermensch, the overman. Not a tyrant, not a villain, but a fully realized individual, a creator of values, someone who walks away from systems that no longer serve them and builds something better in their place. The Übermensch doesn't sit around hoping to be noticed. He defines his own meaning. He doesn't wait to get promoted. He creates impact on his own terms. He understands the system without being enslaved by it. He knows when to play the game and when to flip the board. He understands power isn't inherently evil, it's necessary. Not power over others, but power over your own direction, your own life. You've seen people like this before. The entrepreneur who left a stable job to build something bold. The investor who turned rejection into innovation. The builder who stopped asking permission and started taking risks. Think of Elon Musk, pushed out of the very company he helped create, written off by others as reckless, and eventually building an empire off vision, conviction, and a refusal to be governed by fear. What sets these people apart isn't just talent or luck, it's mindset. They stopped waiting for the system to validate them. They stopped asking, when will they finally see my worth? And started asking, why am I even giving them that power in the first place? That shift, from waiting to creating, from submitting to owning, is exactly the path Nietzsche pointed toward. That's what stepping out of the cage of moral labor actually looks like. But here's the hard part. Escaping that cage means giving up something genuinely comfortable, your attachment to being seen as good. It means being willing to disappoint people who benefit from your silence. It means being willing to stand alone for a while as you build a new foundation. That takes more than confidence. It takes real courage. Because true strength isn't about dominating other people. It's about authorship, about building a life aligned with with your deepest values, instead of the values a system handed you to keep you compliant. This isn't about becoming selfish, it's about becoming sovereign. So, ask yourself, what would happen if you stopped waiting to be rewarded and started rewarding yourself with the life you actually want? What would it look like to stop asking for a seat at someone else's table and start building your own? You don't have to become ruthless, but you do have to take responsibility for your own power. Once you accept that the system isn't going to save you, the only real path forward is to stop serving it and start authoring something greater. So what does that actually look like in practice? After the awakening, after seeing through the illusion of moral labor, after you've stopped waiting for fairness, after you've decided not to abandon morality, but to reclaim your power? What's next? It starts with this: kindness isn't weakness, but strategic kindness, that's real strength. People often confuse being good with being passive. They think saying yes, avoiding conflict, and putting everyone else first automatically makes them virtuous. Nietzsche would push back and say morality without awareness is just obedience wearing a disguise. The goal isn't to become cold or manipulative, it's to become conscious, to learn how to navigate the world with both a moral compass and an actual survival strategy. Strategic kindness means knowing when to help and when to walk away. It means reading people rather than just trusting them by default. It means understanding timing, when to speak, when to stay quiet, when to act. It means you don't say yes to everyone just to be liked. You say yes when it lines up with your goals, your truth, your strength. Because here's the reality: not every job deserves your loyalty. Not every leader deserves your trust. Not every opportunity deserves your time. You have to become someone who recognizes when a situation has stopped serving you and has the strength to leave. Walking away isn't failure. Sometimes it's exactly where freedom begins. This is where power actually comes in. Not as something taken from other people, but something claimed for yourself. Power to create, power to say no, power to build systems where you're not just earning, you're owning, where your energy fuels a mission that reflects your values, instead of quietly powering someone else's machine. That might mean starting your own business, building a second income stream, or learning how influence actually works, not to deceive anyone, but to defend your own vision. It might mean learning to negotiate, setting real boundaries, saying, "I won't do this anymore," and actually meaning it. None of that betrays your morals. It reflects your maturity. Because the truth is, if you never learn how the power game works, you'll always be a pawn in it. But learning it doesn't mean losing your soul in the process. The key is treating power like a tool, not a trophy. Let your ethics steer the direction, and let strategy carry the decisions. Nietzsche put it simply: power isn't evil, it's the will to become more than a servant, more than a cog, more than just the good employee. It's the will to author your own worth. And you can't do that while treating morality like a cage. You have to treat it like a compass, one that points toward your own direction, not someone else's approval. So no, don't throw away your principles, and don't become another cynical operator chasing status for its own sake. But do learn how the game actually works. Understand leverage. Recognize when you're being used versus when you're genuinely being seen. Because the future doesn't belong to the obedient. It belongs to the clear-eyed, the conscious, the people who merge principle with power, empathy with edge, not the ones waiting for the world to change, but the ones who learn to change the terms of their own existence. If you grew up believing hard work alone was enough, that keeping your head down, staying loyal, and doing things the right way would eventually pay off, it's time to reconsider. Not because hard work is worthless, but because hard work without power, without strategy, without ownership will keep you stuck exactly where you are. The people who actually break through don't just labor, they study the system for what it is, understand it, and when the rules stop serving them, they write new ones. That's the real difference between surviving and leading, between being a cog in someone else's machine and becoming the architect of your own future. So if you're tired of waiting, done with the myth that sacrifice alone is enough, ready to think more clearly, act more deliberately, and live on your own terms, this is where that starts. Subscribe for more ideas like this. Philosophy that doesn't just explain the world, but gives you real tools to reshape your place in it. One idea, one decision, one step at a time.